Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Seth from the REtipster blog and the REtipster podcast. Today I've got a special guest that I'm talking to. This is Brian Davis of SparkRental. Brian, how's it going?
It's going great, Seth. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. So Brian has been gracing the REtipster blog over the past several months now as a guest writer, and he's been doing a really good job. I've really been enjoying his writing and just the articles he puts together. And so I figured, it's probably about time he and I actually talk and just I get better acquainted with his business. I know a little bit, but I want to learn more in this call today. And I think he's got a lot of stuff to share that's probably going to benefit myself and you, dear listener. So we're just going to dive into this. Brian, why don't you sort of tell us your background? My understanding is that you're a real estate investor. You own a number of rental properties, and I think you live abroad part of the year. Can you tell us your background? How did you get into real estate investing?
Well, thanks for the flattering intro, first of all.
Yeah.
So, so I fell into real estate investing kind of backwards. I graduated college with a psychology degree and a criminal justice degree, which were fun as an undergrad, but they have about zero value in the real world, right? So my stepfather got me a summer internship with a guy he knew who owned a mortgage company. So I started working for a subprime mortgage lender, and this is back in 2003. So you know what ended up happening in that industry.
Yeah.
But I ended up specializing for this company doing loans for real estate investors, and specifically doing renovation loans. So guys who were mostly going in and flipping, but some of them would buy these shells, renovate them, and then refinance them and keep them as rentals. So I didn't particularly love the job. It did get better as I started specializing a little bit and working more with real estate investors. But I had this idea that what if I'm still doing this when I'm 65? What if I'm still working in a cubicle 40 years from now? And it was just depressing. So I started saying things like, oh, well, when do I get to retire already? And meanwhile, I'm 22, 23 years old, having this sort of bitter, negative attitude. It occurred to me one day, though, that it didn't have to be a bitter joke. It could be a real question. When could I retire? I realized that some people were actually out there stacking up streams of passive income. And I had the perfect opportunity to learn from some of these guys, which I promptly didn't do nearly enough of. But I started going out and buying rental properties, and it didn't work out that well for me at first. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a coach. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I made a whole lot of mistakes. I lost a bunch of money. But I did get some experience in real estate investing. And, even those mistakes that ended up costing me so much money, that set the stage for the entire rest of my career. So when the housing markets collapsed in 2008 and mortgages dried up and no one was buying rentals anymore, doing renovations anymore, I wasn't making any money as a account executive for this hard money lender anymore. But I had a foundation to go work for another company that they were actually a landlord legal services company, an online company. So that background of being a landlord, having my properties, making all those mistakes, it did end up serving me in kind of a backwards way, as my career progressed. And I ended up learning a whole bunch of other skills working for an e-commerce company, online marketing, managing a SaaS company and so forth. So.
Very cool. Yeah,
it's a nutshell of how I got started.
No, that's awesome. Good backstory. So you mentioned you made a bunch of mistakes. Can you sort of explain, I assume this was on your first, one or two or three deals you did? What happened there? What were the mistakes you made? How did you find these deals? What went wrong exactly?
Well, it was really more than just my first couple of deals that I made those mistakes on. So my first property, I kind of lucked into it working out. I bought that one from my boss at the time. And that one was okay. And then I went on this buying spree where I must have bought 12 properties or so in the course of 2 years,
wow.
Which was just it's too fast.
Yeah, it's really fast.
And so I didn't have time to learn from those mistakes. I was just going out and I'd saved up some money, saved up a bunch of cash, and loans were easy in those days, even for investors, maybe even especially for investors. And so the biggest mistake that I would say that I made is that I didn't have a real grasp of how to forecast cash flow. So I was going out and buying these rental properties, but I didn't know how to do things like calculate CapEx, capital expenditures, and estimate vacancy rates. And I wasn't budgeting for property management costs. I was just making all of these, in retrospect, very amateurish mistakes. But I think my most critical mistake was not understanding how cash flow worked for landlords. People talk about the 50% rule. I'd never heard of the 50% rule. And it cost me a lot of money.
Sure. For anybody who's not familiar with the 50% rule, what is that, quick?
The 50% rule is that you will have about 50% of your expenses, non-mortgage expenses with a rental. You can count on about 50% of the rent coming in the form of things like vacancy rate, repairs, maintenance, property management, et cetera. Okay. Again, not including your mortgage, any debt service you have on the property.
Curious, if you got 12 properties, like what kind of down payment were you having to put on each one of those?
Well, I was buying them to renovate them, so not much of one. So, I would do the buy, renovate, rent it out, refinance, repeat. So I was getting cash back for each one as I was renovating, but I was probably putting down 20% or so. But these were cheap properties. That was another mistake that I made, is I was buying in gang war zone neighborhoods in Baltimore City. So really some of the worst neighborhoods in the country. And my friends said that I was fearless. So I was really more stupid, walking around. I would walk around these neighborhoods at 10 o'clock at night, and it was the dumbest thing that I ever could have done. But I was 25 years old, and I felt that I was invincible. And but yeah, they were bad neighborhoods. They were dangerous neighborhoods. The tenants never paid on time. You had to twist arms every month to try to get a rent payment, and even then, it was grudging and coming. I had high vacancy rates, high turnover rates, high repairs. The tenants would leave the properties in terrible shape. It was just a nightmare. Yeah. So that was another one of those lessons I learned the hard way, is that there is a floor. There is a minimum point at which you really shouldn't be investing, unless that's a niche of yours and you really know exactly what you're doing, which of course I didn't at the time.
Yeah. So were you managing all these properties yourself?
I was for a while. When I changed jobs and I was no longer doing loans, my girlfriend at the time was a travel nurse, and she had to leave Baltimore, where we were living, because her contract ran out, and she invited me to go with her. So at that point, I left for about 2 years and traveled around the country, a few months in different cities. And I did have to hire a property manager at that point. But even before that, even when I was managing the properties myself, I didn't understand that you really need to budget for property management costs, even if you're managing them yourself, because it is a labor expense. Whether you're doing that labor or whether you're paying someone else to do that labor, it's still labor. So if you want to compare your returns from a rental property, for example, to a mutual fund or an ETF, or some other truly passive investment, you need to take those labor costs into consideration, because you're not doing that labor every month managing your ETF shares that you own, right?
Yeah. So I know 2003-ish. Was that about the time you were buying these properties? 2000.
Well, that's when I graduated college. So it was a couple years later when I was really buying these properties. I bought my first property in 2005, I think. And then I really went on a buying spree from 2006 to 2008, which was really probably the worst moment in history to buy real estate, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as you're saying that, because it was about 2005 when real estate investing just entered my radar for the first time. Like, that was the year I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it was like, oh,
great book.
That's how rich people do it. And I remember looking just in my market for rental properties, and like, it just seemed impossible to find anything that would cash flow. And that was part of what eventually spurred me on to do land investing instead, or, focus more of my energy on that. But I'm wondering, like, if you could go back to 2005 and like redo all this stuff, like, what would you do differently? Like, would you just not have bought anything because prices were so high, or would you have like looked in a specific way to find better deals, or I don't know, like what would you tell yourself back then?
Well, the first thing that I would teach myself, if I could go back and be my own mentor, I would teach myself, as we discussed earlier, I would talk about how to forecast cash flow accurately. I would also tell myself not to invest in neighborhoods that were that economically devastated, because I didn't have the skills to do it, and most landlords don't have the skills to succeed in those neighborhoods. So those are kind of two fundamental things that I would teach myself. I mean, knowing what I know now, it would be hard to tell myself to go out and buy a bunch of real estate knowing that, there was such a big crash coming. But with that being said, it's still possible to make money and to succeed in markets that are a little overheated. And in 2005, they were probably a little overheated. By 2008, they were really overheated. So,
yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like basically mistakes were made on these first several deals. So like, how did this all pan out? Like, did you end up selling those off, or like, how did you get from there to what you're doing today?
I did end up selling many of them off, but not then, not in 2008 when I really wanted to. And some of those properties I actually had bought with the intention to sell. And by the time that I realized what was going on with housing markets, it was too late to be selling those properties by this point. We're getting into the second half of 2008. And, the writing was on the wall, and, everyone started pulling their money out of property. And Baltimore City actually got particularly a hard hit, because up to that point, there were a lot of DC and New York investors who were coming in and scooping up Baltimore City rental properties because they seemed like such a bargain compared to those markets. So all of that money evaporated basically overnight in Baltimore. So it got particularly hit hard by the crash in 2008. So anyway, I couldn't sell these properties that, even the ones that I had set out to specifically buy, renovate, and flip. I couldn't sell those, so I was forced to keep them as rentals. And it took years for me to be able to sell any of them, basically. So does that answer your question? But so around 2012, my personal finances had recovered enough, and my attitude towards real estate had recovered enough that I started going out and buying properties again. And then since then, I've kind of pruned my portfolio down some. So, I got rid of some of the rotten apples that just were never really performing well, and probably were never going to perform well, and have a more stable portfolio at this point.
I guess it kind of depends on who you ask and what perspective you're looking at. But those were, for some people, very tough years from, '08 to 2014-ish, when just stuff had crashed and it was really cheap. But at the same time, like, deals were so easy to find. And it's interesting, like, when you're in the game for long enough and you kind of see very different environments and how the cycles come and go, and you just sort of have the benefit of saying, okay, what does a really good deal look like, and what does a not so good deal look like? Like, I don't know, just in my market, it's frustrating almost, because like I'm used to looking at a rental property as something that just has this massive cash on cash return, and just like you can buy it for dirt cheap. Like, that's what I consider to be a good deal, because that was when I got all my deals, and like those just aren't out there anymore, or they're very, very difficult to find.
Hard to find, yeah.
I don't know, it's annoying. So is your stuff all in Baltimore now? Is that where you have continued to invest?
It is.
Okay.
It is. I'm not actively investing right now because I'm living overseas temporarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, my rental properties are all still in Baltimore.
Okay. So I assume you've got a property manager handling these, or are you somehow managing them remotely, or how does that work?
I have a property manager who manages most of them. I do manage one of them myself, just to keep myself in the game a little bit, and because it's a more expensive rental and the property management fees would be quite significant.
Okay, cool. And so how many total rentals do you got right now?
Right now, I'm down to 4.
Okay.
So yeah, I had 15 at my peak a few
Mhm.
years ago. I sold off the majority of them, and I'm looking forward to getting back in the game once I move back to the U.S. I don't want to buy any properties here in Abu Dhabi where I live now,
Mhm.
uh, for a whole lot of reasons. And I don't quite feel comfortable enough buying properties overseas. It's one thing to buy properties out of state, when you're living in the U.S. It's another thing to buy them when you're you know, a
Mhm.
minimum of a 15-hour flight away.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting. So what brought you to Abu Dhabi? Like why are you there and what's going on with that?
well, the short answer is that my wife works here.
Okay.
um, she works for an American school. She's a school counselor. A slightly longer version is that um, we had been together for a few years and we were engaged, and she knew that I was feeling some wanderlust and really wanted to get outside of Baltimore and see more of the world,
Hmm.
and ideally to live internationally for a while. So instead of she saw that coming, so instead of fighting me on it, she quietly went off and joined she signed up for a recruiting service for international educators, and started interviewing for jobs. And I actually didn't even know about this until she had been at it for a little bit. um, and we went to a job fair. This was in February of 2015. We went to a job fair in Boston for international schools, and it was quite a whirlwind. She got 5 job offers over the course of 24 hours.
Oh man.
And yeah, places ranging from Shanghai and Hong Kong to Qatar to one of the Baltic states, I think. Anyway, but the most attractive one, the one that resonated with us, was Abu Dhabi. Everyone speaks English in Abu Dhabi, so that made it a soft
Yeah.
landing. Um, but the head of school who we talked to just pitched it pretty well, gave us a pretty good impression of what life was like here, and we went for it.
Hmm.
And it's been an adventure ever since.
Do you have
Yeah.
like plans to come back to the States at any particular point or?
We do. So we spend summers in the U.S. We try to split our summers between the U.S. and Europe. This summer we'll be in the U.S. the entire summer
Hmm.
because we didn't make it home for Christmas this year. But we will be leaving Abu Dhabi at the end of next school year. So that's June 2019.
Hmm.
Whether we will move back to the U.S. or whether we will move somewhere else internationally, that's still
Hmm.
open for debate in the
Sure.
Davis household. But
Sure.
we'll just see what happens.
Okay.
Trying to stay open-minded about it.
Sure. So I know you mentioned you're sort of managing one of your properties from afar. Sounds like there must be some kind of special resource or tool or something that you're using to do that. Like, how are you doing that? Like, how do you collect rent? How do you market your properties for sale? Like, what do you use to handle all that?
Well, one advantage that I have had with it is that in the one turnover that we've had since we have been away, I was actually home for it. It was over the summer, and
Hmm,
that was
okay.
by design. We scheduled that lease to end when we knew we would be home for the summer.
Okay. Cool.
Um, but so I use Craigslist, and I use HotPads as far as marketing uh, that property for rent.
Hmm.
HotPads is nice because it syndicates out to um, other listing services like Zillow and
Hmm.
Trulia and so forth. Um, as far as collecting rent, I don't want to plug my own service too hard here, but we actually do have a rent collection service at SparkRental, where landlords can collect rent by either ACH, bank transfer, or credit card, or have the rent deducted directly from the tenant's paycheck. So
Okay. Cool.
yeah.
Awesome. Is that like the main thing the Spark Rental does? Is there anything else that that service can be used for?
Well, the rental industry is the main industry that we cater to with that service.
Okay.
Um, and maybe we should explore other industries as well.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, we really try to cater to mom and pop landlords and smaller property management services.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. Um, Interesting. So when you're like marketing these properties for rent, and maybe I don't know, maybe you sort of already answered it when you schedule the turnovers for when you're in the States, but like if you had to do a showing or something like that and you weren't here, how have you ever had to do that? And if you did have, or if you ever do, like, how do you handle that part of it?
Well, I haven't had to do that while being overseas. I have I have leaned on friends who live in the neighborhood before
Hmm.
to do showings if need be. But if it became an issue, I mean, if I had a turnover while we were here in Abu Dhabi and I wasn't home to handle it myself, I would have to hire a property manager.
Hmm.
Um, I couldn't. I don't think I could ask
Hmm.
my friends or family to take that on for me.
Hmm.
Um, but knock on wood, we haven't had that problem yet. So
Hmm. Cool. Alrighty. So I know we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of understanding cash flow and how to project that and not buying in war zone neighborhoods. Are there any other like big lessons or surprises you've had along the way, just with your experience of owning rentals, maybe warnings to others or anything like that for people who are trying to get into this?
yeah, one of the big pieces of advice that we teach in our trainings is that your returns as a landlord are not determined by what happens in a typical month, but rather it's determined by those irregular but big expenses that you have. For example, vacancies or major repairs, evictions, turnovers, because turnovers, you have the potential for a vacancy, but you also have maintenance costs
Yeah.
like repainting and or recarpeting or whatever that you wouldn't otherwise have. So minimizing those huge but irregular expenses, that's how landlords can improve their returns most dramatically. And most landlords don't think in those terms. Most landlords, when you ask them what's the one thing you can do to raise your returns on your rental properties, they say, oh, well, I just need to raise the rents. But what are you going to raise the rents by? $50 a month, maybe $100 a month if you're lucky,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully you don't lose your tenants over it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the real way to improve your returns, and don't get me wrong, we do encourage people to raise their rents, marginally every single year and set those expectations with their renters. But the real way to improve your returns as a landlord is to systematically try to cut to the bare bone those big but irregular expenses,
Mm-hmm.
turnovers, vacancies, evictions, rent defaults, um, major repairs, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, man. I can see how somebody would mistakenly think that it's all about like the monthly recurring thing and not so much like the turnover, like the big, less frequent big events. But that's exactly how my experience has been too. I mean, really, I don't know what percentage, but a huge portion of all the biggest checks I've ever had to write has been like directly linked to the fact that somebody was either leaving the property or arriving at the property. And something about that event that just causes a lot of big magnifying glass to go on the property and fix all kinds of issues that may have crept up over the years. I mean, are there any other ideas or just, I don't know, tips in general on how to lower turnover? Like, how do you? I mean, maybe it's kind of an obvious answer, but I mean,
No, no, no. It's actually not. It's not obvious at all. We actually teach an entire course, not just about turnovers, but we teach an entire course about systematically automating, delegating, and eliminating the work and those big expenses of managing your rentals. So I'll give you a quick example. One thing that we have people do is schedule their leases to end in mid-spring, like the end of April, end of May,
Mm-hmm.
so that they have a much higher number of, there's much more demand, many more people moving that time of year, instead of being stuck with a turnover in, say, the holidays when almost no one is moving. And to get an answer from your tenants a month or two in advance, so that ideally 6 weeks before that turnover, you can be marketing it for rent
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that you have someone set up to move in there the day after your old tenants move out. And that might sound simple and it might sound self-explanatory, but it requires thinking several steps ahead. You need to, for example, have all of your vacant photographs of the property from the last vacancy saved on your computer so that you can upload them 6 weeks in advance, right? Of those tenants moving out. So you need to have a system in place to handle all of these different components of it and be several steps ahead of where you need to be and what's going to cause those big but irregular expenses.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if can you do anything like if the tenant notifies you that they're going to leave, just say like, no, I'm sorry, you're not allowed. You're locked in for life.
Send Vigo over there with with a baseball bat or something.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't tried that yet, but maybe that's worth a shot. Huh, okay. So
No pun intended with a shot.
This training that you guys do, is that part of SparkRental, or like where could somebody go to find that stuff?
We do. We have a courses menu on SparkRental.com, and that particular course that's under Property Management Pro is that particular course. But yeah, it's all about minimizing vacancies, minimizing rent defaults, and we go through all of an entire system of how to manage your properties in a way that's our goal for people is to cut their work in half and double their returns, which sounds lofty, but it's actually not as hard as it sounds if you can eliminate those big, time-consuming, expensive events.
Interesting.
Or not eliminate them, but cut them to a bare minimum.
Yeah, I would imagine part of that is probably doing like, pulling credit reports and doing background checks on the tenants that live in your places. I was actually just doing a blog post about how to read a credit report, because I know sometimes those can be really confusing for people. I'm wondering when you're looking at a credit report, is there anything that you look for that's like, no, like this person is not living here, or like what kind of red flags do you watch for?
So I like to look at their monthly payment history for their trade lines and their monthly debt obligations. If I see a pattern of them making those payments late, that's a huge red flag for me, because if they don't pay their other bills on time, they're not going to pay their rent on time. That's just human nature, right? People talk about how income will tell you can they pay, credit will tell you will they pay. So yeah, I like to look at monthly payment history. I look for lawsuit history as well. If they have a history of lawsuits, either as the plaintiff or as the defendant, that's a huge red flag for me as well. If there's a one-time event that appears on their credit report, for example, a big medical expense that they had trouble with, I'm more lenient about that. Isolated one-time events, you can understand, and it doesn't, excuse me, it doesn't show a pattern of late payments. But when you see that pattern of people making their payments late, month in and month out, that's a huge red flag, and that's a sign that they're not going to pay you on time, and they're going to make you chase them, which is not at all what being a landlord is all about, right? It's not why any of us got into this business. We want passive income, not having to harass people. So.
Yeah. Do you do some kind of a background check as well when you're screening your tenants?
Yeah, we do. So actually through our website, we're partnered with Credit Bureau TransUnion. So it comes as a package, full credit report, nationwide criminal check, and a nationwide eviction search. And actually the eviction search to me is in some ways more important than the other two, because it gets to the root of whether someone is going to be a good tenant or not. Have they violated their leases in the past and had to be evicted? And past behavior or past performance usually is indicative of future results, despite the legal disclaimer that we see on, from investment advisors.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine about the whole credit report, credit history thing. And just like I hadn't even thought of this, but he was explaining his whole methodology, and he doesn't just look at the credit score itself, but really understanding why. And particularly what he was talking about was, there could be somebody with a terrible credit score because perhaps they lost their job and they couldn't make their payments on their student loans or something like that. But they did continue to make their rent payments to the landlord. So it's basically saying that in a pinch, they prioritize their rent payment over their whatever else payment. But that's why the credit score is so low. I mean, when you look at something like that versus somebody who might have a high credit score, but they also have, $50,000 of credit card debt, just because they got a high credit score doesn't necessarily mean that all is well. There could be other issues going on there. So it is important to just sort of use your critical thinking and discernment and like understanding like what is going on behind that. And that whole eviction search thing, that sounds like super relevant. Like, because like you said, it's really getting to the heart of the issue. Does this person pay their rent on time? Yes or no? Like, that's kind of like the most important payment. I mean, they're all sort of important to looking at, but I mean, if you really had to narrow it down to one, like that's kind of it.
Right. And you make a great point that it's not about the credit score. And the credit score is a simple summary. But that's why, to your point, you need to know how to read a credit report and how to look beyond just the score, because the score doesn't tell you the story about, what kind of borrower are they? What kind of, is their fiscal house in order? And what happened? Why? So yeah, I mean, you make a great point that landlords really need to understand how to read a credit report and how to dig into some of those details and understand what has happened in this person's fiscal history.
What's your long-term plan, not only for your rental properties, but also for like SparkRental? Like, where do you want those two different business enterprises to go in your future life? Any ideas?
Well, we want to keep SparkRental a small company, small but mighty, as they say. Yeah, I mean, we are not following that stereotypical Silicon Valley path of, go out and get a whole bunch of venture capital funding and then go have an IPO and do all that. We're in it more as the long-term mom and pop small business structure of trying to build some ongoing passive income from that, as well as from my rental properties, obviously. And as you can tell, I like having the mobile lifestyle, the nomadic lifestyle, being able to work from anywhere and live from anywhere and set my own hours and so forth. So yeah, I mean, we're in SparkRental for the long haul, though. We have no plans on selling it or ever going public or anything like that. Yeah, we're here indefinitely. We are focused heavily on mom and pop landlords and smaller property management companies and helping them to build a business from their rentals and to build up passive income, because that's, at the end of the day, financial independence is what we all want, right? Even people who don't know that that's what they want, when they say that they want to retire one day, that's financial independence. So we're all about financial independence and helping people get there.
Well, are there any other big words of advice for new investors or anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
We've touched on it somewhat frequently throughout this conversation, so I don't want to beat it to death, but I think it's important that new investors don't count on earning their returns at some future date, counting on appreciation with their property. I think all real estate deals should make sense at the moment when you buy them. Whether you're flipping or whether you're buying a rental property, the numbers need to make sense right now based on the current after repair value if you're flipping, or based on the current rents and cash flow if you're buying a rental. So, I cringe every time I hear someone say, well, I'm going to buy this property and, the neighborhood's gone up 15% over the last 2 years, and it's going to keep going up another 15% over the next 2 years. And then I'm going to sell it and be rich. That's how people lose their shirt in real estate. So my parting advice for any real estate investor is make sure that the numbers make sense on the day that you buy that property. Don't assume appreciation with your property.
Actually, for all the ones I've ever bought, and I've sort of like gone the other direction of saying like, what if rents go down? What if vacancy rates go up? What if expenses are like twice as much as I thought? Like, what if everything just goes horribly with this property? Like, will it still cash flow? And
important questions.
As long as
not enough investors ask.
Yeah. But I mean, as a result, if things go normally as expected, it's going to go really well. Basically just means you have to say no to a lot more stuff. But when you finally find the one that's worth saying yes to, it's kind of hard to lose on those. That's sort of the benefit of being overly conservative like I am, I guess.
Well, it's a good way to not lose your shirt on a terrible deal. And that's coming from someone who has lost his shirt on several terrible deals. So
I'm curious. I just thought of this question off the top of my head. are there any like good books that you'd recommend, like as you've built your business and, not only Spark Rental, but also your rental properties, like any books you recommend that have kind of opened your eyes or made you see the world in a new light?
Well, I'm trying to come up with some that aren't, super mainstream
Yeah.
so that I can sound more interesting and more original. But we mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad, which was actually probably, I feel like, the millionth real estate investor to say this,
Yeah.
but that was probably the book that got me thinking about
Mhm.
building up streams of passive income and, shifting my attitude towards money, to, have your money work for you and not the other way around.
Mhm.
Um, as far as entrepreneurship, I gotta say, Jim Collins' Good to Great is a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the study that he did is really should be read by not only every entrepreneur, but by every senior leader in a company.
Cool, man. Well, if people want to get a hold of you or learn more about what's going on, is Spark Rental the best place they should go?
Yeah, sparkrental.com. And, look, my partner, Denny, and I are very open and transparent. So you can email me at my personal email address, brian@sparkrental.com. We do not hide our personal emails. In fact, we invite people to contact us, and
Mhm.
we make it a priority to get back to people within 24 hours. So yeah, feel free to email me, brian@sparkrental.com, or visit sparkrental.com and check out what we're up to. We'd love to talk to you.
Thanks again, Brian. Appreciate it. And yeah, for the rest of the viewers and listeners out there, we'll talk to you guys next time.
Seth, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
You bet.